The kingdom burned under a sky of crimson fire, screams and chaos flooding the streets. Amid the invasion, a desperate knight abandoned the battlefield, not to save himself, but to protect the Empress, his twin sister. But Empress Yahello was no helpless royal. The youngest sword master in history, a gray mage of the Ivory Tower and a war hero feared across the empire, she met the threat with calm steel in her eyes. If the enemy truly came for her neck, they had chosen the wrong prey. Yahello, once hailed as a hero and powerful mage, was equally infamous as a tyrant, having overthrown the kingdom of Hain at 16 through a bloody rebellion. Her twin brother, Valen, urged her to flee, but she refused, revealing he was never truly her closest aide. Their tense exchange was cut short when the Emperor's forces stormed in, led by a man who had long awaited her downfall. Accusing her of unchanging arrogance even as the empire burned, he vowed to dethrone her. Yahello, unfazed, threatened to feed his soldiers to her dragon, cripple him, and keep him as her captive. Valen stepped in to protect Yahello during a sword fight, revealing surprising skill, but she insisted on facing the enemy herself. The duel was fierce, with the attacker insulting Valen and eventually knocking him down. When Valen recovered, Yahello had already defeated the foe, until a dragon arrived, darkening the sky. The wounded enemy, called Yahello the hero of the people, admitted to summoning ancient beings and launched one final attack. Yahello defended both the castle's magic and herself, but the blow cost her an arm. Amid a devastating dragon assault, she resisted retreat until Valen called her by her childhood nickname for the first time in decades. He lamented his past inaction but affirmed his bond with her before futilely facing the dragon's flames. As the kingdom burned and death closed in, Valen's final wish was to protect his sister if given another chance. A voice called for him to wake, and he opened his eyes to find himself alive decades in the past in the body of his 17-year-old self, long before the kingdom's fall. Valen was stunned. Rudy, who had died in the Great Purge, now stood alive before him. When he asked the year, she said it was spring of Imperial Year 1073, the first year of Empress Yahello's reign. Valen realized this was just before the Great Purge, when Imperial relatives would try and fail to overthrow Yahello. She would hunt them down without mercy. In his past life, Valen survived as her twin brother, but Rudy was killed as a warning. Valen knew the Great Purge was just the start. Rebellions and purges would eventually destroy the empire. He couldn't involve himself in ruling. Yahello had killed her own kin for the throne, and if he showed weakness or became a threat, she would kill him too. He had him appear uninterested in power while secretly stopping her tyranny from ruining the empire. The answer came to him. He had done this before. In his past life, he lived as a scoundrel away from imperial politics, vowing never to return, but now he had no choice. The Great Purge would begin today, and Valen had no time to waste. He tossed books to the floor, startling Rudy, then grabbed a wine bottle and spat it out in disgust. That's when he realized he needed to find the traitor's letters. Valen quickly found the letters and threw them into the fire. His half-brother stormed in, demanding answers, but Valen simply called him dear half-brother and questioned his uninvited arrival. Valen lounged on the sofa with a wine bottle as his half-brother accused him of betrayal and destroying the letters. Calling him a traitor for sharing the Emperor's blood, they drew their weapons and sentenced him to death. Knights stormed in, capturing the rebels. Valen suddenly smashed a wine bottle over his brother's head, leaving the room in stunned silence. Valen mocked the rebels, making them panic and flee. The knights, realizing he wasn't with them, told him to return to the palace and avoid magic or sword training for his safety. Valen dismissed them, demanding better wine instead. The knights saluted and took his half-brothers away, and he kicked one as they passed. He breathed a sigh of relief, knowing a moment's delay could have caused disaster. Rudy crawled out from under the table in tears, asking if he was hurt. He assured her he was fine and apologized for scaring her. She sensed his odd behavior but chose not to question it. He thanked her loyalty and hurried off to the imperial wine cellar. Valen knew his actions were reckless, maybe even foolish, but in this moment, they were necessary. One last task remained before the Great Purge began. Valen moved quietly through the empty corridor, his footsteps echoing faintly against the stone floor. The silence was unsettling, and he wondered why there was no one in sight. His unease grew as he approached the Empress's winery, pushing open the heavy door and stepping inside. The place was unusually dark, shadows stretching across the walls. Without warning, something leaped at him from the gloom. Valen instinctively stepped back, narrowly avoiding the attack. His eyes adjusted and recognition struck him. It was one of the undead hunting dogs that Yahello had personally created. The beast's glowing eyes locked on him, and he realized the danger he was in. A thought crossed his mind. Could he use magic in this young, untrained body? He had never tested it before. He glanced quickly at his hands, uncertain but desperate. The dog let out a deep, threatening growl and lunged forward again. In the next instant, Valen summoned every ounce of willpower and cast flickering, blooming flame. A fierce beam of fire shot forth, striking the beast squarely. The dog howled in pain, its body igniting in roaring flames. The acrid stench of burning fur filled the room. Without waiting to see if it would rise again, Valen turned and sprinted toward the far door. When he reached it, he paused to check his surroundings. No one had seen him use magic, a crucial relief. If word got out, his position would be in jeopardy. He slipped inside another chamber and found himself surrounded by rows of newly stored wine bottles neatly arranged. There, standing with a small bottle in hand, was a maid. Valen recognized her instantly. In his previous life, this very maid had been involved in a failed assassination attempt on the Empress. She had once served the young princess, but turned against the crown after her master's capture. She had poisoned the Empress's wine, hoping for revenge. When the plan failed, Yahello in her fury had sent the princess's body back to her family, ensuring their hatred for the throne. That single act had ruined any possibility of peace with their powerful noble house. Valen knew he could not allow history to repeat itself. He stepped out from the shadows and told the maid to stop. She flinched at his sudden appearance, her grip tightening on the bottle. He asked her to set it down, but she refused, her voice cold, declaring she served only one master. With a sigh, Valen said that was unfortunate, then suddenly raised his voice, shouting for guards and claiming there was an intruder in the wine cellar. The maid's eyes widened in shock before she lunged at him with a knife. Valen reacted without hesitation, casting sharp, piercing flames. The fiery magic struck her, knocking her to the ground, injured. Just then, the knights burst in, weapons drawn. They ordered her to surrender, and Valen strode past without a backward glance. The following day, Empress Yahello presided over court. She gazed at the maid with disdain, remarking on her audacity to sneak into the wine cellar in an attempt to poison her. The young princess stepped forward, pleading for mercy. She explained that the maid had been with her since childhood, acting only out of loyalty. Yahello listened but revealed she already knew. She declared that since the attempt had failed, the maid would be permitted to take her own life rather than face execution. She handed the maid a cup of wine, promising that her family would be spared from punishment. Her gaze then shifted to the princess. She demanded to know why the princess had joined the rebellion. The princess confessed that her brother had become a sword expert at the age of 25, leading a failed rebellion the year before, which resulted in his execution. Before more could be said, a young boy stepped forward, accusing Valen of also receiving rebel letters. Valen cursed inwardly. This accusation might be enough to draw dangerous attention. He quickly turned to Yahello, denying the claim. Mocking the boy, he pointed out that he was the same coward who had fainted after being struck with a wine bottle. The boy shouted back, calling Valen a liar. Yahello raised her hand for silence. She commanded everyone present to drink from the wine cups before them. One by one, they obeyed. Moments later, the boy collapsed, dead from poison. Valen exhaled in relief. It seemed Yahello was prepared to let the matter pass. But then her eyes fixed on him, sharp and probing. She asked why he had been in her wine cellar in the first place, and how he had known an assassination attempt would occur. Valen froze where he stood, his thoughts racing. He had been caught. Then suddenly, Valen said he had been trying to steal a bottle of wine for himself. The statement sent a ripple of shock through the court. Every head turned toward him and whispers broke out. Some muttered that he must have gone insane, that he had chosen to dig his own grave in front of the Empress. Empress Yahello narrowed her sharp eyes at him. "You dare to steal my wine?" she asked, her tone cold and testing. Valen bowed slightly, wearing an expression of contrition. He apologized, explaining that after being forced to drink only her cooking wine for so long, he could no longer resist the aroma of her finest bottles. He added that because of his attempted theft, the true poisoner had been caught, and perhaps that alone was worth her forgiveness this time. For a moment, the court held its breath. Then Yahello laughed, a low, amused sound. She said he was audacious and had clearly lost all fear of her. Yet she admitted that the one who had saved her life should not be punished. She announced his pardon. Valen thanked her respectfully, hiding his relief. Inside, he thought to himself that his plan had worked exactly as intended. But Yahello was not finished. She remarked that she had heard troubling reports from her maids and knights, that he had burned his letters, discarded all his books, and thrown away his sword. She advised him not to try reclaiming those things again. Valen remained silent. Yahello ended the court session, saying she was tired, and the hall immediately filled with murmurs and whispers. He guessed that most people now believed he had lost his mind entirely. That suited him well. In truth, he only needed one person to see him as harmless, Empress Yahello herself. Later that day, at the Platinum Knights training grounds, the sun bore down on the armored men running laps. The commander barked orders, shouting at them to run faster. One knight gasped that he was out of mana, but the commander simply told him to keep going till he collapsed. Meanwhile, Valen sat comfortably on the sidelines, sipping wine while Rudy poured for him. He observed Yahello's merciless training style, pushing knights to their limits, while he lounged without breaking a sweat. Yahello walked among the exhausted knights, scolding them for being weak and demanding more effort. As the training continued, a knight approached Valen. He remarked that Valen looked like he had drunk too much. Valen replied coolly that he wasn't drunk at all and considered it a fine opportunity to be provoked. The knight smirked and taunted him, saying he was surprised Valen had survived even after raiding the Empress's wine cellar. He called him a drunkard and a scoundrel. Valen smirked back, remarking that the knight must be a pathetic fighter if he couldn't handle such training without whining. The knight's expression darkened. He said he had heard that Valen abused maids and harassed women within the palace. He warned Valen to restrain himself and leave the grounds quietly. Rather than be offended, Valen decided to turn the dirty rumors to his own advantage. He casually asked the knight whether he had a younger or older sister. The knight stiffened in surprise and demanded to know why. Valen answered with deliberate provocation, saying he preferred women like the knight himself. The knight's face flushed red with humiliation. He shouted that he would teach Valen the meaning of shame and raised his weapon to strike. Before the confrontation could escalate, another knight entered the area, his voice commanding them to stop. Valen turned to greet him politely as Sir Bonal, but in truth, he recognized this man as Dame Tentia. In Valen's previous life, Tentia had been falsely accused and exiled, later becoming the trusted right hand of the rebel prince. Dame Tentia looked between the two men and asked what was going on. Valen was quick to respond, claiming that the other knight had insulted him by calling him a drunkard and a scoundrel. The knight protested angrily, saying Valen had insulted his family first, specifically his sister. His hands trembled with rage. Valen's thoughts soured. This was bad. He hadn't realized the man actually had a sister. The knight demanded they settle it right then with a direct fight, but Dame Tentia intervened, suggesting they resolve the matter with an official duel instead of a brawl. Valen readily agreed. Tentia, acting as the senior knight, said the duel would take place on Friday and personally promised to obtain permission for Valen to train with a sword until then. Valen accepted, thinking it was the perfect arrangement for his plans. When Friday arrived, the training grounds were buzzing with energy. Every knight seemed to have gathered and the air rang with shouts and anticipation. Valen felt a twinge of nervousness. Normally, this many people would never attend a duel between knights of this rank, but the crowd's size meant the event had drawn unusual attention. Then he sensed a presence behind him. He turned and froze. The Empress herself, Yahello, stood there, ready to watch. The announcer declared that the duel was a formal sparring match under the Empress's observation, demanding that both fighters display courage and unmatched skill. The two opponents took their positions. Valen's stomach twisted. Of all the possible days, it had to be official observation day. He understood that before Empress Yahello's sharp eyes, he would not be able to conceal the skills he had retained from his past life. While his mind was still racing, the knight charged at him with an angry shout. Valen swiftly tossed aside his training tag and reacted in an instant, aiming his sword at the knight's leg. The knight evaded, and the announcer immediately called out that striking below the waist was forbidden. A chorus of boos rose from the watching knights, condemning Valen's action as dishonorable. He feigned ignorance of the rule and offered an apology. The knight scoffed, saying it was the most basic rule in existence. Their swords clashed again, steel ringing in the arena. The knight grinned mockingly, remarking that Valen was holding up better than expected. He even taunted Valen about introducing him to his sister. Valen responded with a remark that only stoked the knight's fury further. The knight shouted that Valen had crossed the line for the final time. Without hesitation, the knight unleashed the Empire's swordsmanship level 1 technique, Unity of Albath. Valen recognized it instantly. The technique caused every muscle in the body to expand at once, fueled by mana and released explosive force. The sheer power behind the blow sent Valen stumbling backward, almost off balance. He realized the technique was a fearsome combination of mana infusion and physical enhancement. The knight came at him again, swift and relentless. Valen knew that failing to block this next attack would mean death. In that moment, he channeled mana to reinforce his own body and met the assault head-on. The sudden resistance shocked the knight, and from the corner of his eye, Valen noticed the Empress observing with interest. The duel continued, Valen calm and collected, the knight seething with rage. With precise footwork and calculated counters, Valen eventually forced the knight so far back that he nearly fell from the ring. Breathing hard, the knight accused Valen of secretly undergoing mana training. Several other knights murmured doubt, claiming Valen had never been trained in such arts. Valen denied the accusation outright, telling them not to cover their own lack of skill by blaming him. Still, the head knight's eyes lingered, convinced he had seen mana in play. Frustrated beyond reason, the knight charged again. Valen concluded that the matter could no longer be handled subtly. He hurled his sword toward the advancing opponent. The knight deflected it, but Valen closed the distance in a heartbeat and delivered a vicious kick between the legs. The knight screamed, crumpling to the ground in agony as the entire arena froze in stunned silence. Valen threw his head back and laughed wildly. Someone beside the Empress called the act disgraceful, but Valen, unbothered, declared himself the victor as the knight writhed on the ground. The head knight began to reconsider his suspicion, deciding perhaps he had been mistaken about the mana usage. The referee reminded Valen of the no below-waist rule. Valen smirked and argued that he had not used his sword for the attack, so it did not violate the regulation. He also pointed out that it was surely more shameful for a royal with no formal sword training to use the Empire's ultimate knight technique. The Empress's voice cut through the commotion, ordering the proceedings to stop. She called Valen forward. He ascended the steps, bowed, and offered her a formal greeting. She expressed her wish that he would train with care. Valen put on an expression of gratitude, pretending to be moved by her words, though her true thoughts remained hidden to him. She reminded him that royals did not, by tradition, learn swordsmanship, and that restriction applied to him as well. Valen hoped his deliberate performance, making his movements appear instinctive, had worked to conceal the depth of his skill. But then the Empress surprised him. She said he clearly possessed talent, and talent should never go to waste. Looking directly at him, she asked whether he wished to formally learn swordsmanship. Valen stood stunned, unable to mask his shock at the unexpected offer. The Empress had asked Valen if he would like to learn swordsmanship. Valen pretended to be shocked, acting as though he could not believe such an offer could be made so easily. Inside, he wondered if his performance had truly worked, but then he realized that this was most likely a test. As he looked at the Empress, he noticed her smiling faintly, which confirmed his suspicion. Feigning disinterest, he told her that he had no passion for sportsmanship and that he hated sweating. The Empress questioned his reasoning, suggesting that he could easily find enjoyment in the discipline. Valen shook his head and refused again, saying that all he wanted was to relax and enjoy a comfortable life. Her tone then changed. She told him she could not bear the thought of her kin suffering humiliation. Without giving him the option to argue, she ordered someone to take Valen to the training grounds. He would begin training with the Platinum Knights. Valen acted as though this was a shocking and unpleasant order, but inside he was relieved. Now he could finally learn swordsmanship without having to hide his intentions or worry about suspicions. The next morning, when he arrived at the training grounds, Valen took a moment to admire the surroundings. The warm sunlight, the fresh greenery, the birds singing in the distance, and the sight of training equipment neatly arranged. It all felt like a perfect start to the day. His mood, however, quickly soared when he was handed the training armor. The moment he put it on, he realized it weighed 55 kilograms. He immediately cried out in disbelief, asking why he had been sent here. The knight captain, unimpressed, ordered him to run faster, mocking that even a 5-year-old could catch him at his current pace. Valen thought this was still a rare opportunity. After all, this was where he could learn the Empire's swordsmanship developed by Iris and Jay, an art feared across the continent. But he had forgotten that such training began with the most grueling physical conditioning. Before long, he was staggering, about to vomit from the sheer exhaustion. By the evening, he collapsed onto the ground, sprawled out like a corpse. He thought to himself that this could very well kill him. The knight captain walked over and looked down at him. He asked if Valen was already worn out. Valen replied that physical activity had never been his strong point. The captain told him that he still needed to stretch or else he would be unable to move the next day. Valen grumbled internally about his terrible luck. The knight captain began stretching beside him, showing him the proper movements. As Valen went through the motions, memories of his past life came flooding back. He remembered Tentia, how she had been falsely accused of a crime and exiled, only to later meet the rebel prince and become his trusted right hand. In the future, she had risen to become the Empire's 10th swordmaster. This time, Valen was determined to bring her to his side before that turning point occurred. He knew her incident was close at hand, which meant it was time to set his plan into motion. Standing up, he approached Dame Tentia and told her that he had a bottle of Tears of the Wasteland, a rare and precious wine gifted to him by the Empress herself. He invited her to join him for a drink. Tentia was taken aback. She said that Tears of the Wasteland was the finest wine, something money could not buy. Valen confirmed this with a nod and described its sweet, fragrant taste. As a white wine enthusiast, Tentia's interest was instantly piqued. She told him she would wash off her sweat and come right away. Valen knew then that his plan had worked. At the Red Palace later that evening, Tentia could not stop thinking about the wine. She arrived at Valen's residence and apologized for being late. He told her it was fine and invited her inside. She had brought snacks she thought would pair well with the wine. She noticed that the room was softly lit with candles. Valen explained that bright lights hurt his eyes, so he preferred the warm glow of candlelight. He poured her a glass and Tentia took a sip. The flavor and aroma were exquisite, wrapping around her tongue in a way she had never experienced. Valen compared it poetically to shining stars and blazing flames. He then told her to hold the glass for a moment and stepped out of the room. Tentia, still enchanted by the taste, happily drank more wine. But then something made her freeze. The captain of the Black Iron Knights, Barbados, was standing there. His voice was cold as he informed her that she was under arrest for stealing an Imperial artifact. Shock rippled through her. Barbados demanded to know where Lord Valen was, as he needed to take her into custody immediately. At that moment, Valen suddenly appeared, dressed only in a bathrobe. He asked who dared to disturb such a pleasant moment. Everyone, including Tentia, stared at him in stunned disbelief. Tentia could hardly process the absurdity of his appearance, thinking it was one of the most ridiculous things she had ever seen. The Black Iron Knights arrived and informed the prince that Dame Tentia was the prime suspect in the theft of a royal artifact. The captain stated firmly that she must accompany them at once for questioning. Valen immediately protested, insisting that Tentia had come directly to his room right after training, leaving her no time to steal anything. The captain countered, saying it was entirely possible that someone had passed the stolen artifact to another person inside the palace. Valen argued that if that were the case, they should be looking for that person instead of blaming Tantia without solid evidence. He reminded the captain that the queen must already be furious about the theft and that a rational judgment was necessary in such a delicate matter. The captain admitted that Valen's reasoning was correct. He also remarked that rumors about Valen going rogue seemed untrue, as the prince was clearly sharp-minded and composed. However, Valen realized that he had been focusing too much on clearing Tantia's name and had neglected to consider the larger implications of the situation. Vane stepped closer to Valen, lowering his voice so only he could hear, and complained that Valen had completely ruined the good atmosphere and caused a scene. He said that he had worked hard to build rapport with Tantia, and now things had become unnecessarily complicated. Tantia, who was observing their exchange, was taken aback and shocked to see them speaking so casually in the middle of the tense moment. The captain's eyes swept across the room, taking in Valen's attire and the bottle of wine and the carefully arranged decorations. It became clear to him what kind of meeting this had been, and he asked dryly if this was the good time Valen had referred to earlier. Valen simply smiled in response, but the captain's expression grew more unpleasant. After a brief pause, the captain decided not to arrest Tantia immediately. Instead, he ordered her to remain in her accommodation until further notice. Tantia agreed to comply, and the captain prepared to leave. Valen told him to hurry along, and Vane let out a small sigh of relief at the situation's temporary resolution. Once the captain was gone, Tantia turned to Valen and said she had no idea about something, then made a vague remark involving a partner. She seemed to draw this conclusion because of Valen's appearance. When Valen asked what she meant, she gave a polite bow and said she would take her leave. She wished him a pleasant time before quickly exiting. Valen was momentarily stunned and shouted for her to stop, but after a second's thought, he decided it was no longer worth pursuing and let her go. The next day, Valen was walking through one of the palace corridors when he spotted Rudy. He called out to her, and she turned with a smile, holding a small bundle of flowers in her hands. She explained that she had picked them near the palace. Valen asked why she was there, and Rudy told him that a friend who worked in the palace had asked her to deliver a package outside the city earlier that morning. Rudy noticed that Valen seemed to be in a noticeably better mood than before. She remarked that he must be feeling relieved about something. Valen replied that he had managed to save someone from a wrongful execution, though the true culprit had yet to be caught. As they continued talking, Rudy mentioned that she had heard about the missing artifact, the giant Algrim quill. Hearing this, Valen thought about the quill's history. It was a legendary object once belonging to Algrim, a traveler who had journeyed across the world. The magical quill was said to be able to draw accurate maps entirely on its own. Valen began reasoning aloud. The thief was likely one of the palace servants, as they would have the easiest time smuggling the artifact out without drawing attention. He speculated that a servant would be unlikely to leave the palace alone with such an item. Instead, they would probably hand it to a trusted friend who could move freely, such as a royal maid, disguising it as an urgent delivery or harmless package. Then a sudden thought struck him. He recalled Rudy telling him she had delivered a package outside the city that very morning. His mind quickly connected the dots. Rudy froze in place, her eyes widening in shock as she realized what Valen might be thinking. Rudy stood frozen, shivering with fear over what she had done. Her voice trembled as she told Valen that he must report the matter immediately. She insisted that he should be the one to handle it himself. Valen asked her where she meant, but Rudy quickly warned him of the danger. She said that if word got out, he could be accused of smuggling artifacts. She reminded him that his reputation within the court was already not good, and that such an accusation would only make it worse. Valen stepped closer, gently holding her hands and telling her to calm down. He assured her that he would handle the matter himself and that she should not worry about it. He then asked her for the name of the friend she had helped earlier. Rudy hesitated but finally revealed that it was Banton, a servant stationed at the Western Palace. Valen said he understood and told her there was only one thing she needed to do for him. Rudy asked what he meant, but Valen did not answer immediately. At the Western Palace, Valen made his way to the servants' quarters. As he approached, he overheard two servants speaking in hushed, urgent voices. One admitted they had no idea what to do now. The other muttered angrily about a reckless fool who had meddled with the artifact, saying they should have taken smaller, less noticeable items instead. Hearing this, Valen allowed himself a small smile, thinking that the thief talked far too much. He stepped forward and opened the door, startling the three servants inside. All of them froze in shock before calling out his title in surprise. Valen's eyes scanned the group, and he asked which one was Banton. A young man slowly raised his hand and identified himself. Valen repeated that he wanted to speak to Banton alone. The other servants immediately left, clearly eager to avoid being involved. Once they were alone, Valen's tone grew sharper. He asked Banton who had put him up to this, but Banton feigned ignorance, claiming he did not understand what Valen meant. Without hesitation, Valen summoned sharp, searing flames that forced Banton to his knees in pain. In desperation, Banton tried to lash out, but Valen moved quickly, delivering a hard kick to his face and ordering him to stop. He accused Banton of embezzling public funds and tampering with royal artifacts, demanding to know if he really believed he could get away with it. Banton's lips curled into a laugh. Valen narrowed his eyes and asked what was so amusing. Banton replied that there were rumors painting Valen as cold-blooded, someone who would even sell his half-siblings if it suited him. But here he was showing sentiment after all. He went on to say that he had no intention of dying alone, warning that Rudy's life was in his hands. Valen asked if Banton thought he would simply stand by and let that happen. Banton scoffed, mocking him by pointing out that no knight would follow his orders anymore. Before Valen could respond, the door opened and Tantia strode into the room. She announced that she had heard the man who framed her was here. Banton's expression changed instantly, his confidence shaken. Valen told her that her timing was perfect and ordered her to take care of Banton. Tantia agreed without hesitation, stepping forward. Banton stammered, trying to beg for more time, but she silenced him with a cold command to be quiet before striking him with a brutal kick to the face. At that moment, Ruby entered the room. She remarked that the knight had been too quick in her actions. Valen greeted her calmly. Rudy bowed her head and apologized, saying she had caused trouble by not realizing that Banton was such a scoundrel. Valen told her firmly that it was not her fault. There were all kinds of scum in the world, he said, and Banton had approached her with bad intentions from the very beginning. She should not let it weigh on her heart. Even so, Rudy admitted that it still hurt. She had believed Banton to be a friend, and the betrayal cut deeply. Valen glanced out the window and saw the Black Iron Knights approaching. He told Rudy to head back first, and she agreed, leaving quickly. Valen then told Tantia that she could stop, but by then, Banton had already been beaten badly. She said it was still not enough and that she wanted to make him truly regret his actions. Valen stopped her again, saying there was a more urgent matter at hand. She asked what could be more important. Valen explained that if he were caught by the knights now, it would all be over. He needed to move quickly and recover the stolen artifact before that happened. He was certain there was only one place where shady deals involving stolen goods would be conducted. Together, Valen and Tantia made their way through the city until they stopped in front of a door. Valen pushed it open. The damp, heavy air inside made Tantia wrinkle her nose, and she remarked that it smelled like stagnant water. She asked where they were heading. Valen opened another door ahead of them and told her to guess. Then, with a faint smirk, he welcomed her to the Empire's underground waterways. Tia looked around in surprise and said she had never known such a place existed. She asked where it led to. Valen explained that it led to the slums, a place where all kinds of suspicious and dangerous contraband gathered. Tia said she understood, but then she asked how he knew so much about the underground waterways, since she doubted he had ever been outside the palace. Valen was momentarily startled by her question, but he quickly regained his composure. He told her she did not need to know that. He then explained that the underground waterways stretched beneath the entire capital, hidden from the eyes of ordinary people. That was why they could be used to secretly transport illegal magical tools or regions without detection. Tia listened carefully, intrigued by the information. Valen added, almost casually, that the waterways were also the shortest route to sneak from the palace to the casino. Tia's eyes widened in shock, and she immediately told him that such behavior was disrespectful. She thought the route was not particularly suspicious, but it was still reckless to use it in such a way. Valen, however, thought that it did not look suspicious at all. They continued walking through the damp, winding passages of the waterways. Tia began to lose track of time and wondered aloud how long they had been walking. The twisting tunnels felt like a maze, and she could no longer sense their direction. Valen finally said they had arrived. Ahead of them stood a ladder leading upward. Tia asked what the place was, but Valen told her he would go up first and instructed her to wait until he called for her. She agreed without hesitation. Valen climbed up the ladder, moving quietly. As he reached the top, he paused, listening to the sounds above. From the noises, he guessed there were 3 people. He decided it would be an easy encounter. When he emerged from the opening, 3 people were indeed standing there. They turned to him and demanded to know who he was. Valen calmly drew his sword and asked if they truly wanted to know. In response, the 3 men brandished their knives. 2 of them lunged forward, but Valen's movements were swift and precise. In less than a second, both attackers fell, killed instantly. He then pointed his sword at the remaining man, who stared at him in terror. Valen remarked that the man still seemed curious about his identity. The man immediately dropped to his knees, begging to be spared. He swore he would do anything. Valen questioned him about a package that should have arrived 3 days earlier. He described it as being the size of 2 palms. The man quickly replied that he had indeed seen it. It was wrapped in light brown paper, and their boss had personally come to take it. Valen asked where the boss was now. The man answered that he was at the hideout in the slums. Soon after, Valen, Tia, and the man were walking through the filthy streets of the slums. The ground was uneven and littered with debris. Tia wrinkled her nose in disgust and told Valen to watch his step, warning him about the bad condition of the road. Valen thought to himself that the slums were even worse than he had imagined. He felt a strong surge of anger and silently vowed that he would one day sweep this place away completely. Suddenly, the man leading them bumped into someone. The stranger scolded him, telling him to watch where he was going. The man quickly apologized. Valen also told him to be careful. Then the stranger looked at Valen, recognized him, and immediately bowed, addressing him as "my lord" before apologizing again. They eventually reached their destination. The man pointed ahead and said that this was the hideout. Taya let out a breath and said they had finally arrived. Valen stood still for a moment, scanning the place with a calculating gaze. The man then said he would take his leave. But before he could go, Valen suddenly grabbed him, his voice dropping into a deep, furious tone. He called him a pest and accused him of preparing a gang inside the hideout. Valen realized then that the person the man had bumped into earlier was actually part of the gang. Without hesitation, he hurled the man aside. "Tia," he called. "Yes, Your Grace," she answered immediately. The man, now terrified, pleaded for his life, saying it was all a mistake. But Valen did not show mercy. His sword flashed, and the man was beheaded in an instant. Valen thought it was despicable, but if the gang had chosen to reveal themselves like this, then he could only consider it a fortunate turn. With cold determination, he drew his sword once more and began walking toward the hideout. Valen drew his sword, his expression cold and calculating. He thought that if the gang members were going to reveal themselves so openly, it would work perfectly in his favor. He moved toward the hideout entrance without hesitation. Inside, the gang was waiting, their knives gripped tightly in anticipation. One of them, curious about the commotion outside, leaned toward the door and peeked through a narrow crack. The movement was his last mistake. Valen's sword shot forward like lightning, piercing the man through before he could even shout. Valen's mind was focused. He thought that any approach to an enemy stronghold must be made with absolute caution. Without wasting another second, he raised his boot and kicked the door wide open. The hinges groaned as it slammed back against the wall. Inside, the people turned to him, their expressions twisted with anger and outrage. With calm precision, Valen summoned his magic. Flickering, blooming flames materialized in his palm, 5 blazing orbs glowing with lethal heat. He hurled them toward his enemies, and the air erupted into fire. Flames consumed the wooden walls, and smoke began to swirl upward. The heat was suffocating, and several gang members collapsed unconscious before they could escape. Outside, Tantia waited. She saw smoke rising and quickly asked what had happened. Valen stepped out briefly, his tone casual as if nothing serious had occurred. He told her it seemed there had been a small fire and assured her not to worry. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the burning building, telling her firmly to wait where she was. The inside of the hideout was now a chaotic mess. Firelight flickered across the walls, and the smell of burning wood and cloth filled the air. Valen moved with deliberate steps, scanning the room for the gang's leader. Suddenly, something came hurtling toward him from the shadows. A man rushed forward, swinging a heavy axe and shouting incoherently. Valen instantly recognized the telltale signs: wild eyes, erratic movements. They were high on some kind of drug. He didn't flinch. With a swift, controlled motion, he kicked the man hard, sending him sprawling to the ground. Before the man could recover, Valen's sword flashed, ending his life in an instant. Then Valen noticed another figure standing in front of a wardrobe. The man's posture was tense, his stance too deliberate. He was guarding it. Valen narrowed his eyes. The man spoke first, asking which gang Valen belonged to. Valen ignored the question entirely. His thoughts were sharp. Now that Tantia was safely outside, there was no reason to hold back. It was time to finish this. He tightened his grip on his sword and channeled his strength. Using Empire Swordsmanship Level 1. Unity of All, he unleashed a devastating slash. The blade cut through the air with overwhelming force, striking down every enemy in its path. Bodies fell in a single blow, lifeless before they hit the ground. But the power came at a cost. Valen could feel the strain tearing through his muscles and draining his mana. This was a technique far too demanding for the body of a 17-year-old, but he did not falter. When the attack ended, he saw that the man guarding the wardrobe was still alive. He was trembling, his legs unsteady, yet he made no attempt to flee. His eyes met Valen's with a resigned certainty. The man spoke again, saying he knew someone with Valen's skill would never let him escape. She stepped closer, his voice calm but edged with authority. He revealed his identity. He was Duke Valen, and demanded the package that had been delivered here. The man hesitated for only a moment before confirming its existence. Valen advanced toward the wardrobe. His hand reached for the handle, ready to open it, but before he could, the man who had been bowing suddenly lunged forward with surprising speed. Valen reacted instantly. He twisted his body and drove his sword backward, piercing the man through the chest. Blood spattered the floor as the man gasped, his strength fading rapidly. Even as death took hold, he clung desperately to Valen's feet, as though trying to stop him from reaching the wardrobe. With a sharp motion, Valen freed himself from the dying man's grip. He then turned back to the wardrobe and pulled it open. Inside, in the dim firelight, was a boy. The child's face was pale and frightened, his body trembling. Most shockingly, he was missing one of his legs. Valen studied the girl before him, her ragged clothes unable to hide the sharpness in her gaze. He wondered if she was the boss's daughter, his mind gnawed by the thought that he had seen something he should not have. Without a word, he drew a pouch of coins and tossed it at her feet. Her eyes widened in disbelief, but he only told her this would keep her alive. He warned her the Black Iron Knights would arrive soon. Her thanks lingered in the air, but Valen shook his head, insisting he was not trying to help. The girl bowed again before disappearing into the night. Watching her go, he thought she appeared shabby on the surface but was sharp underneath. Perhaps they would meet again. Once alone, he slid a painting from the wall to reveal a hidden safe. Using the dead man's key, he retrieved a small chest, his expression souring at its contents. Inside were low-grade drugs, the kind poisoning the slums. He searched further and found a plain wooden box. Flames kindled in his palm, ready to destroy all evidence tied to Rudy. A sharp voice interrupted him as Dame Tentia entered in clattering armor, scanning the room. She had seen the girl leave and came to check on him. Valen lowered his hand and extinguished the fire. He greeted her, noting her relief, and she asked if he had found it. His thin smile carried quiet pride. She hesitated, revealing she doubted him, and his brow twitched before he told her to take the box and report it as her own achievement. She was shocked, protesting that it was his work, but he suggested perhaps he should take the reward himself as his entertainment funds were running low. Her expression hardened before she smirked and seized the box, thanking him. He thought that one day, by Jaylee's side, this woman would reach the rank of Sword Master, a pillar of the Empire. The crimson carpet stretched endlessly as Valen walked through the castle halls. He opened gilded doors, wondering why Jaylee had summoned him. Inside, the chamber was filled with vibrant flowers like a greenhouse. The young empress greeted him warmly, saying she had been waiting. Valen bowed, hiding unease, and she mentioned Dame Tenchia's report, noting his advice had helped. Realization struck him that the righteous knight had given the credit to him. He forced a smile, claiming Tentia had mastered humility. Jaylee's gaze sharpened as she disagreed. A chill swept down his spine, and he believed this was his death sentence. Dropping to his knees, he begged for mercy, but her serene smile told him otherwise. She said he was too valuable to waste in the Red Moon Yahello Palace and appointed him as her advisor, summoning him often for counsel. His breath caught in suspicion, thinking she wanted him close to watch him. Her eyes softened as she recalled their shared past. She reminded him of when she allowed her half-siblings to take their own lives and how he caught the maid who poisoned her wine. Reviewing the list, she found all the culprits had ties to her enemies except for him. He was her only blood relative who had not tried to kill her. Valen's heart jolted at the memory. She admitted it pleased her more than she could express. At 17 years old, she clung tightly to even a single ally. Steeling himself, Valen rose and bowed low, pledging his gratitude for her grace and promising to serve as her advisor with all his strength. Jaylee's smile remained gentle yet carried steel as she warned that if he failed in his duty, she would be the one to take his head. Valen forced a calm smile and accepted her words. The night draped over the palace, and his chambers glowed softly under the flicker of lamplight. His maid assisted him quietly. Her movements were clumsy and her face pale. She apologized and turned to see Rudy, who lowered her head in shame, calling herself a worthless maid and lamenting that he went to such lengths for her. Valen chuckled, adjusting his sleeve, telling her not to worry since everything had worked out and his appointment as advisor was thanks to her. Tears welled in her eyes, though they carried relief, and she bowed deeply in gratitude, her voice thick with emotion. She hesitated before asking where he was going at such an hour. His smile turned sly, his eyes glinting with something sharper than simple mischief. He told her he was going to catch a mage. The intent in his voice carried both confidence and danger, as if the hunt ahead was more than a simple task. The night glowed with golden light as Valen stood before the grand gates of Casino Hope. Its walls sparkled with wealth, music, and laughter pouring into the streets. Adjusting his silver mask, he smiled faintly. So this was Hope. He entered the grand hall, where smoke filled the air and greed hung heavy. Cards shuffled, dice rolled, and fortunes rose and fell amid cheers and groans. Golden chandeliers lit the polished floors as Valen observed everything. Soon, a sharp-eyed woman approached him with quiet intent. She approached with authority, warning that weapons were forbidden. Yet with a faint smile, she admitted exceptions could be made for him. Valen asked how she recognized him, and she answered simply. His white fire hair and golden eyes marked the dragon bloodline of Soleteras, impossible to hide. Valen met her sharp smile with caution. When he asked who she sought, she spoke of the nightmare of gold, the one destroying casinos. Calm and steady, Valen told her to take him to this figure. Though surprised by his boldness, she agreed and led him into the dark corridors. The hallway grew colder and quieter as she led him into the VIP chambers. The noise of the main hall faded, replaced by a new scene. A blue-haired girl sat at the gambling table, moving with effortless grace. With a sly smirk, she revealed a winning hand and pulled in the coins, her laughter carrying a sharp challenge. Valen's gaze softened when he saw Celerizzi. She looked up surprised but quickly recognized him. Her voice held both resentment and weariness as she asked why he was here, reminding him how he had already forbidden her magic, studies, and swordsmanship, and now seemed ready to take gambling too. Valen quietly replied that he wasn't here to take anything. He had only come because he missed her. Her silence carried bitterness before she asked if it was right to deny education just because they were royalty. His smile vanished as he said some lines must never be crossed and drugs had already gone too far. At the word drugs, her hand froze and she demanded an explanation. He revealed poisons were spreading from the entertainment district to the slums and questioned if she truly knew nothing. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion as she asked if he believed the rumors of a fallen mage lost to gambling and drugs. Valen leaned forward with a proposal, loyalty to Her Majesty. Celerizzi's sharp laughter filled the room as she stood abruptly, mocking that this was all he had to offer. Valen urged her to abandon drugs, leave gambling, and return, warning that Her Majesty could forgive anything but treason. She repeated the word with bitterness, and his hand moved toward his sword. She had no staff or tools, yet blue lightning suddenly flared in her palms. Valen froze, shocked that at only 20 she could unleash such power without aid. Valen stepped back, urging her to calm down and turn away from this path. Her face twisted in fury as she shouted that loyalty was something she would never give. Lightning raged through the chamber, shadows flashing across the walls. With no room to retreat, Valen drew his sword, fear in his chest but resolve in his stance. He knew the odds were against him, but his resolve was unshakable. If he failed now, she would once again fall under Gestio's control, just like in his past life. The tension in the chamber thickened, unseen by the patrons outside, unaware that a storm was about to erupt. Valen stood firm, blade gleaming under the golden light as Celerizzi's lightning surged in defiance. His steady stance met her storm, eyes seeing not just pride and pain, but the resolve that kept her from bowing to anyone, not even her own blood. The casino fell silent as brother and sister stood face to face, their bond strained by duty and betrayal. Valen knew words could not heal the rift, only steel and magic would decide their fate. Casino Hope became a cage as Valen and Celerizzi faced each other, neither wanting the fight yet refusing to back down. For him, it was about changing fate. For her, it was about clinging to freedom. Their clash was inevitable, not from hatred, but from convictions too strong to surrender. And within the casino's walls, the storm was about to break. The throne room fell silent as a man knelt before the Empress. He asked if she would kill Duke Valentianus too. With a sharp smile, she said only if he turned against her, adding that he was different, though her tone warned of caution. The man asked if she would trust those the Duke recommended. Her eyes narrowed as she demanded what he meant. When he suggested the Duke might even recommend a royal, she rejected it instantly. With firm conviction, she repeated that such a thing would never happen. Tension filled Casino Hope as Valen faced his sister Celerizzi. He tried to calm her, reminding her she was destined for greatness, but she doubted his intentions. Suspicion turned to anger when she asked if the Empress had sent him to kill her. His denial was answered with a spear of lightning. Valen dodged the lightning as it tore through the room, shattering walls and tables. His heart pounded, knowing a swordsman had only one way to face a lightning mage. Gripping his blade, he unleashed Empire swordsmanship, unity of all pain, his body straining with mana as Celerizzi's thunder shaped into a deadly spear. Her voice turned cold as she hurled the spear with deadly force. Valen roared, pouring everything into his strike, bending the storm upward in a thunderous blast that shook the ceiling. Dust fell as Celerizzi's composure cracked. She realized he had become a sword master. Stepping through the haze, Valen declared with raw resolve that he would reclaim his sister's fate. Chains burst from the ground, binding his limbs with earth magic. She coughed blood from the strain, yet still wielded two elements. Valen's sword blazed red with fire, breaking free in a shower of sparks. Shocked, she demanded his secret, but he only smiled and asked if his display met her expectations. She smirked, mocking his mastery of mana, but he ignored it and asked her to listen. Her answer was cold lightning sparking at her fingertips. Another bolt missed him as he rolled aside. He shouted he only wanted to save her, but she snapped back in pain, declaring she needed no saving and would never abandon the life she chose. His voice broke as he warned her staying meant death. She questioned him, and he revealed the truth. Her massive winnings and lack of chip exchanges had made her a threat to the casino. Her gaze faltered, admitting there might be truth in his words. But the moment was cut short as the doors burst open and the woman from earlier rushed in, pale with urgency. The woman warned mercenaries were coming, urging them to flee. Celerizzi scoffed, boasting she could face hundreds with her magic, but Valen stopped her, reminding her they were exhausted. He then ordered the woman to destroy the drugs in the slums before the Black Iron Knights arrived, and she rushed to carry it out. Valen understood the value of having eyes in the entertainment district and picked up a small case before urging Celerizzi to leave. But as they pushed open the doors, their path was blocked. Mercenaries in dark armor lined the corridor, blades ready to stop them. The air was tense as Valen faced the mercenaries, noting their discipline. At his side, Celerizzi's magic flickered, her exhaustion clear but her resolve unshaken. The casino's lavish halls had turned into a battleground, with both siblings standing against enemies they could not afford to lose to. The mercenary leader demanded their surrender, but Valen stood firm, gripping his sword as his sister's storm surged again. The mercenaries formed a wall before the exit, their weapons raised and their eyes locked on Celerizzi with burning hatred. One of them barked out that she was a traitor, pointing toward the woman in the red mask who had guided them here. The atmosphere thickened, every breath weighed down with the inevitability of bloodshed. Valen stepped forward, pushing Celerizzi behind him, both hands tightening around his swords. There were too many opponents to fight head-on, but his stance remained steady, even as his heartbeat pounded in his ears. He risked a glance back, catching the fragile yet determined whisper from his sister as she asked if he could save her. Without hesitation, his voice rang with unshakable certainty, telling her that losing a mage of her skill would be a loss to the Empire. She closed her eyes, a faint smile touching her lips, then declared that she would bear the burden herself. Lightning began gathering in her palms, arcs crackling sharply in the air as her body trembled from pulling mana deeper than safety allowed. She silently acknowledged that if she pushed herself to this extent, the cost would be hers alone to bear. Valen felt dread twist in his chest as he recognized her stance and the dangerous spell she was preparing. He tried to warn her, but his words were drowned out by the roaring surge of magic. Blood streaked from her eyes as she spoke with the weight of inevitable destruction, naming the coming spell. Panic rippled through the mercenaries as they realized she was casting high-tier magic, their formation breaking in fear. Some turned to flee while others froze, but the power she had summoned could no longer be contained. Valen lifted his swords in desperation, knowing it was already too late to stop her. The spear of thunder struck with devastating force, tearing through the mercenaries in a storm of blinding light and agonized screams. Cables splintered, walls cracked, and the casino shook under the violent blast. A stray arc lashed toward the red-masked woman, but Valen threw himself in its path, barely managing to block with his sword. The current burned deep into his arms as he forced it away. Then silence fell, broken bodies scattered across the floor, smoke rising from where they had stood moments before. Valen's breathing came ragged and heavy as he surveyed the destruction. The damage was immense, far beyond a simple skirmish. He turned toward his sister just in time to see her swaying, her strength spent beyond recovery. She collapsed and he caught her gently, feeling the fragility of her weight. She asked softly if he would truly recommend her, if she could live proudly as a mage. His answer came instantly, promising that he would ensure it. Through pain, her eyes softened and she murmured that such a path was how one should live. The setting shifted to the grand throne room, where Valen knelt beside his sister under the cold gaze of the Empress. She remarked that she had read his report thoroughly and questioned his intention to recommend a talent. Valen affirmed his decision with a steady voice, assuring her that the choice would please her. The Empress' attention turned to Celerizzi, confirming her name before recalling her reputation as a special admission at the Lightning Tower. She asked for more, and Celerizzi explained she could cast lightning up to the 4th circle and earth up to the 3rd, all without incantations. The hall stilled at the revelation, the Empress herself momentarily surprised. Celerizzi continued, revealing she carried the blood of the Solitaras and, like the Empress, possessed a unique way of handling mana outside the common circle system. The Empress's gaze sharpened as she warned not to assume trust simply for sharing blood, though she admitted the connection was notable. Valen stepped forward, urging her to consider that nobles often shared traces of royal lineage, and that killing one would not resolve larger issues. He implored her to allow Celerizzi the chance to prove loyalty. The Empress's expression hardened, the weight of her authority pressing down like a storm. Valen's hands trembled subtly, sensing the tension shifting. He pressed on, stating that he had prepared something to ease her doubts. At his signal, a maid entered carrying a heavy bag, which she emptied before the throne. A flood of casino chips tumbled across the floor, gleaming under the chamber lights. The Empress's composure faltered at the sight of the fortune. Celerizzi bowed her head, stating she had collected nearly 200 bags across the Empire and would offer half to the Empire and half to the national treasury. The Empress was silent, torn between denying the importance of wealth and being clearly swayed by it. After a pause, she commanded Celerizzi to strive wisely, to become an asset to both the Empire and herself. Celerizzi's voice shook as she expressed gratitude, while relief swelled in Valen's chest at the success. The victory was short-lived. The Empress's gaze turned sharply to Valen, her voice demanding to know by what means he had managed to bring such a formidable mage to his side. The sudden venom in her tone struck deep, making his confidence falter. Under her piercing scrutiny, even the swordsman's courage felt dangerously thin, and the air between them grew heavy once more as he searched for the strength to answer. The Empress dismissed Celerizzi with a flick of her hand. The young mage bowed low, trembling under the ruler's gaze, and withdrew without another word. Valen's eyes followed her retreat, sensing the heavy burden she carried. Yet the throne room gave him no space to linger in thought. The Empress's eyes sharpened, her presence turning cold and unyielding. She questioned how a mage of such ability, one who had hidden deliberately, could return unharmed to this place. Valen's blood froze instantly. He forced a smile that felt fragile, almost breaking, while his thoughts urged him to remain calm. He explained that it had been chance, claiming he was at a casino for gambling when he encountered her. She had yearned to reclaim her magic, and perhaps she had followed him because he had promised to help her learn again. The Empress's eyes narrowed at the suggestion, suspicion clear in her look as she evaluated his words. Her question cut deeper, asking why such a person would trust him when his reputation was so abysmal. Valen's smile widened despite the pounding of his heart, answering that while his name carried disgrace, she had spared his life before. The mage had placed her trust not in him directly, but in the mercy she represented. Silence hung heavy until the Empress allowed a faint, amused breath. She admitted he knew well how to make others desire to believe his words and lowered her voice into something sharper. The Empress then informed him that in 4 days Marquis Flanitius would visit with his wife. Valen felt his breath seize, alarm flooding his thoughts. His mind revisited the Marquis's history, a noble whose power could rival kings. His sister, once an imperial concubine, had died giving birth to her son Aquinas. Returning home, the Marquis had been attacked by assassins, losing both Aquinas and his wife. Consumed by rage, he had accused the throne and triggered civil war, plunging the empire into years of unrest. Now with this meeting looming, Valen lowered his head and concealed his unease, vowing to assure the Marquis's visit would pass quietly and without incident. The Empress smiled, satisfied with his answer, but her tone hardened as she announced Dame Tenchia's appointment as his escort knight. Valen was caught off guard as the throne room doors opened and a woman clad in shining armor entered, kneeling. She declared her appointment as his exclusive knight by the Empress's order, signaling her role as both guard and watchful eye. Though Valen realized her appointment served as surveillance, he recognized the advantage of having a knight beside him. He smiled and bowed with Tentia before the throne, declaring his intention to serve with all his strength. The Empress's gaze remained unreadable as she admitted he never failed to surprise her, warning she would be watching closely and urging him not to disappoint her. Later, the scene shifted, revealing a desperate man kneeling before Valen. It was Duke Aquinas, his expression heavy with urgency as he pleaded for help. Aquinas revealed a newborn child, no more than days old. Valen's stomach twisted as realization stirred. Aquinas, voice trembling, named the boy his son, yet admitted his birth had not been registered. Valen's fury erupted, declaring that in these times, when noble bloodlines were tightly controlled, such an unregistered birth was treason punishable by the execution of both parents and child. His anger filled the hall, declaring even he was now in danger because of this reckless act, before Tenchia restrained him, urging calm. Aquinas lowered himself further, forehead to the floor, begging that if Valen spared the child, he would raise him in secrecy so that none would know of his existence. Valen's voice became icy, demanding how he could ensure the boy would never become the spark of rebellion. Aquinas faltered, unable to respond, while Valen pressed his argument that a child of noble blood would always be a potential weapon in the wrong hands, even without intent. Seeing the Duke pale, Valen's hand moved toward his sword, declaring that the law required the seed of rebellion to be cut without mercy. Aquinas clung to him, pleading desperately for the boy's life. Tenchia's voice intervened again, asking if there truly was no other way. Valen paused, considering the possibilities, and finally admitted there might be one. He suggested falsifying the boy's birth records, a statement that sent shock through the room and made Aquinas look up in sudden hope. Valen explained that if the boy were not recorded as a duke's son, but instead as the child of Marquis Flanitius, the entire issue would dissolve. The birth would be reported only after Aquinas inherited the marquisate, at which point the boy would be accepted as the rightful heir. Relief and joy flooded Aquinas' expression as he embraced the child, praising Valen for his brilliance and promising never to forget this favor. Valen dismissed the gratitude coldly. Tentia exhaled in quiet relief, seemingly content that a solution had been reached. Yet Valen's mind darkened again as he considered the dangerous implications. If he knew of the boy's existence, there was a chance the old Marquis might already be aware as well. The thought struck him sharply, bringing the weight of fear back upon him like a blade pressed to his throat, for secrets of noble blood rarely stayed hidden for long, and in the Empire, every secret carried the seed of war. Valen sat apart from Dame Tentia and Duke Aquinas, sunk into his sofa, his thoughts in turmoil. The child's presence had shifted everything. If Marquis Flanitius already knew about the illegitimate heir, the road ahead would be dangerous. What appeared like a tearful family reunion might truly be the spark of civil war. Flanitius takes Aquinas and the child. Garrulous, enraged, sends an assassin. The Marquis seizes it as proof and rises in rebellion. Even without the child, the incident could still be his weapon. Valen closed his eyes, gripping the armrest. He knew he had to uncover the Marquis's true intention before acting. By evening, the three stood beneath the fading sun, watching the horizon drown in red and gold. Aquinas gazed toward the distance, his voice edged with unease, wondering why the man was not here yet. The silence shattered with the sound of rushing wings as two figures descended from the clouds, riding scaled beasts whose landing shook the ground beneath their feet. One man dismounted with practiced ease, stepping forward with a presence that pressed like iron upon the air. He introduced himself as Marquis Flanitius, his hand extended in greeting. Valen clasped it, forcing calm into his tone as he welcomed the man. His gaze slid toward Aquinas, already calculating. Before Valen could finish his thoughts, the Marquis released his grip, turned, and swept Aquinas into a fierce embrace, laughter breaking into tears, declaring that his nephew had grown and would soon become his son. Aquinas stiffened while Valen and Tentia froze in place at the unexpected display. The embrace ended, yet Flanidius' eyes turned sharp, shifting toward Valen and Tentia with deliberate weight. He inquired about the procedure for renouncing succession rights. Tentia answered with formal poise, though unease flickered in her gaze, confirming that the Emperor, the notary, Duke Valentianus, and Duke Aquinas had signed, and it would take effect at midnight. Flanidius smiled at Aquinas, remarking that he had signed a loan, which he found admirable. Valen's thoughts spun. Was he mistaken? Was Flanidius truly just a doting uncle blinded by emotion? He dismissed the thought, knowing sentiment was dangerous now. He gave Aquinas a subtle cue to speak. Aquinas hesitated before straightening and revealing that he had a hidden child. A maid stepped forward carrying the infant. Silence deepened around them. Flanidius' eyes widened while Aquinas continued, explaining the mother's death in an accident and his intention to take responsibility for raising the child himself. Valen studied Flanidius closely, waiting for a revealing expression. But Marcus knelt, hands trembling as they touched the child's cheek. He seemed overwhelmed, tears welling in his eyes as he spoke of the joy of their family being together again. His shoulders shook as he drew Aquinas close, whispering thanks in a voice thick with emotion. Aquinas' own eyes softened with relief. Valen's tension eased slightly, thinking perhaps he had misjudged the man, perhaps he was only a grieving figure holding onto what remained of his family. Seeing opportunity, Valen stepped forward. He addressed Flanidius about the matter of the child's birth registration, to be completed at the capital's church the next day, after which Flanidius should take both Aquinas and the child with him. Valen anticipated resistance due to imperial oversight, planning to persuade him step by step. Instead, Flanidius agreed easily, calling Her Majesty's concerns natural and acknowledging Valen's role as notary. He confirmed they would depart once the child was registered in the morning. Valen paused inwardly. Such easy agreement felt wrong. But Marcus asked to hold the child, and Aquinas allowed it. Flanidius lifted the infant gently, smiling with apparent joy. Yet for an instant, a shadow crossed his lips, a curl that was too sharp, too knowing. Valen's breath caught. This was the man who had started a war in his past life. No matter how warm his expression, Valen vowed never to lower his guard. The danger beneath the smile was one he could never forget. Later, Valen escorted Flanidius and his men to lodgings prepared away from the palace. The building was modestly modern, though dust clung thickly to the corners and cobwebs stretched across neglected beams. Flanidius inspected the walls without complaint, speaking lightly. His soldiers, however, shifted uneasily, their hands twitching near weapons. Valen inclined his head and invited them to rest comfortably. Aquinas and Tentia followed his lead, bowing and parting. Valen turned toward the exit, intending to withdraw and let the Marcus settle for the evening. Just as his hand reached the door, a sound rose from the shadows beyond. It was not the creak of wood, but a grinding, unnatural scraping that vibrated up through the floor itself. Valen pushed the door wide, tension bracing every muscle. From the blackness, it emerged, a colossal centipede, its segmented body clad in glistening armor plates, each joint flexing with dreadful precision. Its many eyes burned red, carrying the promise of bloodshed, and its presence choked the air with the scent of war. The creature's roar was not a mere cry, but a shattering force that shook the hall. Weapons rattled where they hung, and the vibration reverberated through the walls like a drumbeat of doom. In that moment, every gaze locked on the beast. Marquis, knight, and duke alike stood frozen, their bodies struck still by the sheer scale and terror of what confronted them. The fragile calm that had just been built shattered completely, replaced by the rising tide of chaos. The centipede's armored bulk advanced with deliberate steps, each impact resounding through the stone beneath their feet. Its eyes glowed hotter, like embers fanned by a sudden wind, casting streaks of red across the walls. Valen's mind sharpened instantly, recalling too many moments in his past life when such sudden horrors had become the beginning of war. The gathered men and women understood instinctively that this was no ordinary creature, but a herald of conflict, a force capable of breaking their delicate political balance apart. Valen slammed the door shut, feeling the wood groan under immense pressure from outside. The hinges rattled violently as something massive shoved against it. His arms strained to hold the barrier, but the resistance was too great. With a final shattering crack, the frame splintered apart. A monstrous centipede burst through, armored plates glistening and many eyes burning with hungry fire. Valen staggered back, blade half drawn. The creature writhed forward, its screech a grating sound that clawed at the mind like a command. Dame Tentia was already in motion, her sword flashing in the dim light as she stepped to Valen's side. Her stance was sharp and deliberate, ready to strike. Behind them, Marquis Flanidius moved toward the infant's basket. For a heartbeat, suspicion flared in Valen's mind. Could this be a staged attack to seal the child? But Flanidius placed himself before the infant, voice hard with protection. He warned that such a beast was unnatural, not belonging to this world. The centipede reared high, its mandibles clashing like blades, its voice almost shaping words to demand the child. Dame struck first, steel slicing across its carapace. Black ichor spilled, and from the wound erupted a rain of smaller centipedes, scattering across the floor. They swarmed forward in relentless waves. Flanitius' blade moved with surprising precision, cutting through the tide. Chaos erupted in the hall as fighters scrambled to counter the endless, chittering assault from all directions at once. Dame cut down another cluster and called over the noise, asking if Valen recognized the creature. His sword flashed as he replied sharply that it was not from Her Majesty, who despised such filth. His eyes darted to Flanitius with cold suspicion, asking if he knew its origin. The Marquis's face twisted in anger as he cut down more vermin, accusing Valen of suggesting he had summoned them. Words clashed alongside blades, tension rising beneath the din of battle. Valen's weapon pierced a lunging beast, his expression calm yet unreadable. He denied directly accusing the Marquis, but warned caution was necessary. In the same breath, a blade whistled past his neck, cleaving not him but a creature behind him. Flanitius' glare was deadly as he threatened that if harm came to his wife or grandson, Valen would answer for it. Then he turned away, continuing the slaughter, cutting through the swarm with ruthless, measured strikes that betrayed both skill and intent. The battle pressed on, each strike driven by urgency. Valen's mind turned dark, weighing the risk of letting Flanitius live if he was truly the same man who began a rebellion in his past life. Before he could act, Dame shouted, claiming to have found the creature's weakness in the middle segment it was desperately shielding. The giant thrashed wildly, making its defense obvious. Valen gave the order to draw its attention so the vulnerable spot could be exposed. Dame moved without hesitation, slashing high to force the beast upward. The middle segment came into view and Valen charged. His blade came down with crushing force, shattering the chitinous armor. A roar of agony tore through the hall as the creature convulsed. The massive form collapsed, its death throes scattering dust and debris. The swarm of smaller centipedes dissolved into nothing, leaving a tense stillness behind. Yet Valen's instincts warned him that the danger had not passed entirely. Silver residue glimmered faintly on the corpse, forming a magic circle carved into its flesh. Valen's eyes widened with recognition and horror, shouting for everyone to flee. His warning was drowned by the heavens splitting open, unleashing a spear of golden lightning that obliterated the structure. Walls crumbled, fire erupted, and the ground quaked. Valen hit the floor hard, his hearing reduced to a ringing haze. Through it, Dame's urgent voice fought to reach him. Flanitius groaned nearby, battered yet conscious. Aquinas stumbled toward the infant, relief flooding his features as protective wards shimmered around the child, keeping him unharmed amid the devastation. The Marquis exhaled heavily, momentarily relieved. Valen forced himself upright, but the ceiling above groaned ominously. With the deafening collapse, debris rained down. Dame shielded Valen with her body, while Flanitius' wife raised a barrier spell over her family, keeping them alive through the destruction that left the building in ruin. As the dust settled, the survivors caught their breath. Valen's mind churned with frustration at how unpredictable the Marquis' next actions might be in this chaos. Before he could focus further, a figure emerged from the smoke. An armored man, eyes empty and cold, stepped forward with a sword dripping shadows. His voice carried no humanity as he demanded the child's location. The sight of his cracked skin, revealing shifting corruption, told Valen this was no ordinary foe. Dame's blade rose instantly, ready to meet the threat. Valen's mind worked rapidly, questioning why such a corrupted being would seek royal blood. The knight's gaze swept the wreckage, declaring the child absent, before his body warped grotesquely and collapsed into a mass of writhing centipedes. They slithered with eerie purpose toward the debris where the infant lay. Valen's cry tore through the din as he shouted for Aquinas, warning that the enemy sought the child above all else. Aquinas' voice broke as he shouted for his uncle not to approach, his warning cut short by the arrival of another presence. From beyond the smoke came a voice laced with venom, sharp and deliberate as a drawn blade, calling out the name Flanitius. The sound hummed in the air like judgment, signaling that this night's violence had only begun and that the true confrontation was yet to come in the wreckage's smoldering heart. Valen's boot crashed into the wreckage, scattering shattered wood and stone in every direction. The impact echoed through the hall, shaking loose more dust from the unstable ceiling. Dame Tentia grabbed his arm, warning him of the danger, but her voice was drowned beneath his fury. He roared that it did not matter, then drove one final kick through the debris. The wreckage split apart, revealing a narrow path ahead. Without hesitation, he pressed forward, his resolve burning through the chaos. The path led into the inner palace where battle raged. Marquis Flanitius fought the infected knight, one arm limp from a poisoned strike, yet his stance unyielding. Sparks flashed from every clash of steel. A sudden brutal kick sent the Marquis crashing to the marble floor, pain etched into his face. Still, he pushed himself to his knees. Watching this, Valen's chest tightened with a realization he had resisted until now. He had been wrong about him. Dame surged past Valen, steel gleaming as she met the infected knight head-on. The clash rang through the chamber. Aquinas' voice cut across the chaos, warning that the enemy's blade carried poison and his uncle had been struck while his aunt had fallen. Valen's pace quickened, rushing toward Flanitius and kneeling beside him. The Marquis' hand had already begun to darken, black veins crawling upward, but the corruption was still early. If treated immediately, there was hope of survival and recovery. Danger surged again before Valen could act. The infected knight lunged toward Dame with terrifying speed. Valen moved on instinct, steel locking against the enemy's darkened blade. The impact jolted through his arms, but his stance held firm. He spoke with cold steel in his voice, naming the roots of the monster's existence. Shoving forward, he drove the creature back a step before striking. His blade pierced its chest, blood spraying, yet the enemy's laughter echoed deep and chilling in the smoke. Two venomous tentacles burst from the monster's shoulders, glistening with poison. Acquaintance cried out a warning, but Valen had no time to evade. He cut through the writhing limbs only to see them regenerate instantly, more vicious than before. The tentacles lashed toward him, but Dame intercepted, shield raised. The impact shuddered through her frame. She countered with a slash, poison sizzling from the wounds, yet more limbs sprouted. The regeneration seemed endless, an unrelenting storm of venom and flesh. Valen's mind turned swiftly. He recalled ancient knowledge. Fire could halt regeneration, but revealing his power here carried its own danger. A warning to Dame escaped his lips as another attack came from behind. He lunged into the fray, deciding there was no longer time to hide. His sword ignited, flames roaring to life as he unleashed the second level of Imperial swordsmanship. The air warped with heat, and the hall bathed in an orange glow of consuming fire. Dame's eyes widened at the sight. She recognized instantly the mastery required to wield such flames. Valen's burning arc cut deep into the infected knight's form, fire devouring its corrupted flesh. Monster screams filled the chamber, each one sharper than the last. Dame advanced, her sword glowing with the first state. Unity of pain, its edge carrying the weight of countless battles. She struck with divine precision, her blade meeting Valen's flames in a perfect convergence of destruction. Their combined assault overwhelmed the creature. Valen's fire incinerated its tentacles, turning regeneration to ash. Dame's piercing strike cleaved through the enemy's corrupted core. The infected knight roared one last time before collapsing in flames, its form breaking apart into smoldering remains. The hall fell into silence, save for the crackle of fire. Valen's breath came in ragged gasps as he stared at the sword now cooling in his grip, doubt flickering briefly before Dame's voice cut through. She told him not to trouble himself, her words shifting from cold to a rare softness as she declared herself a knight sworn to his loyalty. Valen froze, her sincerity striking deep before he gave a faint nod and thanked her, but the relief did not last. A creeping heaviness was spreading through his limbs. His vision blurred and his body swayed as an unseen weakness took hold. He felt the weight dragging him downward with each heartbeat. Aquina's cry pierced the air, frantic with realization. Valen's hand brushed his own back, coming away wet. The poison tentacle had struck him during the battle, unnoticed in the frenzy. The venom now coursed through his body, sapping his strength at an alarming pace. The hall tilted around him, his grasp on the sword slipping. Each breath grew heavier until darkness pulled him under. He collapsed upon the blood-streaked floor as Dame's desperate scream rang in the ruined hall. Valen stirred from heavy sleep, the weight of exhaustion lingering in his limbs and the dull ache of his body a stark reminder of the recent battle. His eyes opened slowly, scanning his surroundings until recognition settled in. The familiar ceiling, the sofa in the corner, the desk by the window. It was his room, the sanctuary. Relief was short-lived when his gaze fixed on a figure nearby, radiant as the morning sun. Yahello stood before him and dread coiled in his chest. Her voice carried an unnerving calm, laced with something almost tender, as she spoke of the poison that had been purged from his body. Traces might linger, she warned, and he should take care. Valen reacted on instinct, bolting upright in panic before throwing himself from the bed to kneel, forehead pressed to the floor. The gravity of greeting the Empress improperly crashed over him like a sentence of death. His thoughts swirled with grim certainty. Yet Yahello's voice remained composed, instructing him to raise his head. She explained she was merely passing by, mentioning that the succession abandonment had been finalized without incident. The words jolted his mind, pulling his thoughts to Aquinas. He asked, his voice trembling, about the illegitimate child's fate. Yahello replied without weight, saying the child was preparing to leave with Marcus Florentius and his wife, as if the matter were ordinary and unremarkable. Her statement struck Valen deeply, but he forced restraint. The Empress tilted her head, her gaze carrying a knowing light, suggesting there might be something worth confirming before they departed. The unspoken invitation was enough. Valen stood abruptly, declaring that he would check at once. He left the room in haste, her soft laugh trailing behind, echoing faintly down the hall as though it followed him out into the daylight. In the courtyard, Marcus Florentius and his wife stood beside their carriage. Dame was present, her armor polished and her bearing proud. Aquinas held the child with rare tenderness. The Marquis expressed gratitude to Dame for safeguarding his family, crediting her for the smooth completion of events. She answered with quiet humility that it was her duty. The Marquis's wife voiced concern over Valen's health, troubled by the severity of the poison. The Marquis' expression tightened with guilt, his eyes betraying the weight of unspoken thoughts. Valen arrived at that moment, breathless and urgent, startling everyone with his sudden presence. He asked sharply whether everything had concluded without problem. The Marquis' wife murmured in awe about his resilience, attributing it to royal blood. Aquinas, however, gave a crooked smile, remarking that not all royals shared such endurance, calling Valen unusually stubborn. Valen bent forward, still catching his breath, his eyes fixed intently as he demanded assurance regarding the child's condition and status. Aquinas replied gently, confirming the child had been formally recognized as his earlier that morning. Valen's shoulders eased as he reached out, touching the infant's small fingers with trembling hands. Relief softened his features into a rare smile. He murmured his thanks, but the Marquis hesitated, asking if they truly should not inform the Empress about the child. Valen dismissed the worry, explaining that she already knew. His gaze shifted to the palace window above. From high within the palace, Yahello stood observing, her lips curved in satisfaction. She regarded Valen's actions with approval, thinking he deserved a measure of reward. Perhaps granting him rest would suffice. In the days that followed, the scene changed to the Mage Tower's autonomous zone. Valen stood with Rudy and Celerzy as Rudy's eyes widened at the sight of his self-turning enchanted device. The boy's wonder was clear, fascination holding him in place like an unseen tether. Valen pressed a pouch heavy with gold into Rudy's hands, telling him to explore the streets freely. Rudy almost dropped it in shock at the amount, but Valen's voice cut in with warning that any missing coin would be answered for. Rudy's dismayed cry followed as Valen turned away. Celerzy's lips twitched in faint amusement, likening it to leaving a child in a playroom before work. Valen allowed himself a brief smirk, noting that sparing a soft-hearted boy from danger was simply practical. They approached the tower itself, its pale stone rising into the sky. Celerzy remarked that they had arrived, her voice low as they stepped forward. Valen's eyes sharpened, his voice calm as he signaled readiness. The deep toll of the bell echoed as they crossed into the tower's domain. Celerzy warned that the staff he sought was disgraced here and hidden from unproven seekers. She reminded him that her mentor's skill and will were formidable, not to be underestimated. Valen's expression remained untroubled, saying that was why he had come with her, to speak directly to Jestart. She cautioned him again, but his steady gaze met hers with quiet certainty, stating that he never underestimated anyone and that there was always a way forward. They advanced into the great hall, their footsteps the only sound. Its vast, empty space and unusual silence pressed in from every side, the stillness carrying an edge of expectation. His frown deepened at the absence of attendance or activity. Then a voice sliced through the quiet, addressing the palace's infamous duke and questioning his purpose in the ivory tower. From the dim edge of the hall, a figure emerged with deliberate steps. She had hair like living flame, eyes bright with curiosity sharpened to a blade's point. Clad in flowing crimson, she stood firmly in their path, her presence alone marking the first challenge they would face within those walls. The woman with hair like fire stepped into the hall, her presence sharp and commanding. Celerzy stiffened at the sight, bowing deeply as her voice trembled. It had been a while since they last met, and Jestart's gaze softened with familiarity. She remarked on the year that had passed and how much Celerzy had grown. Valen blinked in recognition, the name clicking instantly. Jestart, the Lightning Mage. He noted her swift, almost electric movements exactly as he had expected from her reputation. Celerzy lowered her head, her posture weighed with shame, calling herself an incompetent disciple who had returned in disgrace. Jestart's hands rested gently on her shoulders, countering her words with quiet reassurance. She insisted the fault was hers for not protecting Celerzy back then. For a brief moment, the stern mask cracked, replaced by warmth as they embraced like family reunited after hardship. Jestart's eyes moved toward a cabinet, which she opened to reveal rows of gleaming wands prepared for skilled hands. Jestart told her to choose one, explaining it would be a gift. Tears welled in Celerzy's eyes as she smiled for the first time in years, thanking her master with deep emotion. Valen remained a step behind, silent, his gaze fixed on the exchange while his thoughts turned darker. He remembered that in his past life, this woman surrendered herself to the corruption of an ancient god, her power twisted into something monstrous, enough to trouble even Yahello. She seemed human now, but he could not afford to lower his guard. Jestart's gaze finally shifted to him, locking firmly. She asked what had brought the infamous Duke Valen to the ivory tower. Meeting her eyes without hesitation, he replied calmly. Out loud, he requested that she sell him the wand. Her lips curved into a smirk, refusing without hesitation, stating that the wand belonged to the tower and could not be sold. She called him even bolder than his reputation suggested. Valen's expression did not waver, and his voice carried a quiet challenge. He asked if she was willing to pay the price. She dismissed the idea, saying even billions of gold would mean nothing in the ivory tower where gold held no value. Valen's reply was sharp. He never said anything about paying with gold. The words cut through the air, making her smirk falter. She demanded to know what he meant, and he answered plainly. His silence about what the ivory tower had done, offered in exchange for the wand she refused to part with. Suspicion clouded her features, demanding to know what secrets he could possibly hold. Valen interrupted, naming the giant Logrim's quill. His voice was low but carried burning certainty. He told her not to insult him by pretending ignorance, for he had seen how she wove the contracts, carefully, precisely, but not enough to escape his eyes. Her face froze at the accusation, a bead of sweat tracing down her temple. Still, she claimed she could not give him the wand, her refusal unshaken. Valen countered by saying he would report it to Her Majesty. Jestart straightened defiant, claiming that even Yahello would not confront the tower head-on and telling him to do as he wished. His cold smile followed, asking why she took this path when she only needed to target him from the start. Her composure cracked as she demanded to know what he meant, but he continued, saying the tower had already sacrificed one when the palace demanded it, and she would be no different in the end. Her fury erupted as she accused him of daring too much. Valen's eyes darkened, asking why she had not protected her own. He accused her of failing her sister, forcing her into the red light district. The hall shook with Jestart's roar, calling the accusation unreasonable. Celerizzi's voice cut through the tension, addressing her master. She bowed deeply, explaining that she had received the Empress's approval and now served as a court magician, bridging the tower and the imperial family. Jestart stared at her, shocked, warning that such a path would break her, for no one could belong to two worlds. Celerizzi admitted there was a time she believed she belonged nowhere. She placed a trembling hand on her master's shoulder, her voice soft but unwavering, asking her to prove she had never truly been abandoned. Jestart's lips curled into a sharp grin, her eyes glinting with something dangerous as she called them two-faced siblings. Valen leaned back in silence, his thoughts unreadable in the moment. Days later, the setting shifted. Valen handed a wooden box to Rudy, telling her it was hers. Rudy blinked in confusion, asking what it was. He told her it was a staff, the tower's greatest masterpiece and its greatest taboo, with two of them inside. Rudy opened the box, expecting something familiar, but what she saw resembled not a traditional staff, but a weapon, sleek, ominous, and forbidden. Her breath caught at the sight, the paradox of a masterpiece and taboo combined before her. Valen's smile was thin, almost cruel, as he remarked that it was so well made it rendered ordinary magicians unnecessary. Rudy's hands shook as she pushed the staff back toward him, insisting that he should use it instead. She claimed she could not wield something like that, but Valen closed her hands over it firmly, telling her that there was a contaminator in the capital and that no place was truly safe. He told her to protect herself for his sake, not just her own. Rudy's eyes brimmed with tears, her voice breaking as she said his name. Valen remained calm, though in his heart he whispered words he would never allow himself to speak aloud, because he never wanted to lose anyone again, not after all that had happened. The weight of that unspoken truth lingered between them, the bond forged in that moment stronger than any promise. The staff, heavy with power and danger, now lay in Rudy's grasp, a shield against the unseen threats ahead.